I began to investigate a discourse community that was surrounding youth basketball and sports, and the title of my dissertation was Discourse in Sports, African American and Youth Literacy and Learning in an Out-of-School Setting. It was like language styles and literacy practices of pre-adolescent African American males inside of a youth program. And what we began to see is that there were, one, really interesting elements of discourse. The way G talks about the connection between discourse and identity, how discourse reflects a kind of identity kit that you develop to get recognized as a member of a particular kind of discourse community. And for these young kids, that discourse community was tied to what it felt like and looked like to be an adult in a sports world. So understanding how to, through the coaching that they were getting, this was a bitty basketball league, so these are people who would be an equivalent of middle school, and beginning to see, one, the influence of male and female coaches, but mainly male coaches, mainly African American men, who themselves had developed a certain level of political consciousness to see that sports was a venue through which a number of literacy and learning and personal development, identity development kinds of things could take place. So that process, that context was as much about the social, personal development of these young men as it was about giving them, basketball skills, although basketball was the medium. So they would actually have a moment in the Saturday games and before games. They would have to work on literacy activities for about an hour before they could go out and go onto the court and play. And then when events came up like fundraisers, they were the ones involved in writing up the flyers for the fundraisers and doing the communication with parents and other kinds of things. So there was just a plethora of literacy activities that often are unrecognized, that were associated with just the practice of these young kids engaging in basketball. In this particular case, it could be the same for soccer, it could be the same for any one of a variety of sports. So it was an interesting moment to look at the ways that literacy was being practiced in these subtle venues around just something that the kids were already interested in, so that the basketball was more of a hook. And the social development, the coaches' meetings where one coach was actually not fired because everybody was volunteering, but asked to not coach because he had this sort of dictatorial notion of what a coach should be, coming from a different mindset. And as a consequence, the other coaches and the person sort of hit coaching the coaches, making decisions about who was going to be a good coach and who could coach. So I took the position in that research for an entire season of that basketball league as an assistant coach, and I had a little fanny pack with my recorder on all the time, and you could see the way that the kids were engaging in meaning-making, language, exchanges conversationally with each other, as well as with the adults, as well as with other players. That all was a reflection of a set of literacy practices that had pretty much gone unnoticed at that time. So the notion of a sort of discourse in sports, and the way that a sports identity, the sports discourse, the sports practices and performances were part of a larger set of cultural practices that in this particular community, which was an African American community on the south side of Chicago, had become one of the venues for adults and young people, adult men and young boys, to have these intensive interactions that gave young men mentorship and examples of manhood that went well beyond what was going on in the media in their lives.